I learned how to smile with my mouth while my chest was caving in. Most people still remember me that way. At church on Sundays, standing beside my 2 children in their pressed clothes, my lipstick steady, my back straight. At school meetings, nodding politely, laughing at the right moments. At the grocery store, making small talk about the weather as if my life were as light as the plastic bags cutting into my fingers. No one knew that some nights I sat on the bathroom floor after they fell asleep, pressing a towel to my mouth so they wouldn't hear me cry. Raising 2 children alone wasn't the hardest part. Loving them while hiding what it was costing me, that was. The day it truly hit me wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The kind where the sun comes in too bright through the kitchen window and shows you every speck of dust you've been too tired to wipe away. Amari's was 9. Lana had just turned 6. They were at the table doing homework. Amari's chewed on his pencil the way his father used to. Lana hummed softly while she colored in the margins of her spelling sheet. I stood at the stove stirring a pot of soup that was more water than broth, trying to make it stretch one more night. "Mom," Amari said without looking up, "are we poor?" The spoon stopped moving in my hand. Children don't ask questions like that unless they've been listening. I turned, forcing a lightness into my voice. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged. "Ben said his dad got him a new bike just because, and he said dads do that. Dads do that." The words were simple, but they landed heavy. Lana looked up then, her wide brown eyes watching me carefully. She didn't say anything, she just waited for my answer. I smiled, the same smile I had been practicing for months. "We have everything we need," I said gently. That's what matters. They seemed satisfied. Children want reassurance more than truth. But that night, after I tucked them in and kissed their foreheads, Amari's pretending he was too old for it, Lana clinging to my neck, I sat at the kitchen table with the bills spread in front of me like an accusation. Electricity, rent, school supplies. The car payment that I was 2 months behind on. And at the top of the pile, the letter from my ex-husband, Stevie. He hadn't written to ask about the kids. He hadn't written to apologize. He had written to inform me that he was adjusting his financial contributions due to personal circumstances. Personal circumstances? That's how he described leaving us for a younger woman and moving 3 states away. I remember running my finger along his signature at the bottom of the page. So neat, so controlled, he had always been that way. Calm, logical, measured. When he left, he didn't shout, he didn't even look ashamed. He just said, "I can't do this anymore, Claire." As if I were a job he was resigning from. In the beginning, I thought I could manage. I told everyone I was fine. "I'm strong," I said. "The kids and I will be okay." And we were, on the surface. Mornings started at 5 a.m. I would wake before the alarm, my body already tense. The house would be quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock in the hallway. I'd pack lunches, peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices dipped in lemon so they wouldn't brown too quickly. I learned little tricks like that. Stretching food, stretching patience, stretching myself. Then I'd wake the kids with soft knocks and cheerful voices as if we weren't living on the edge of everything. "Rise and shine," I'd say, pulling open their curtains. After school drop-offs, I worked double shifts at the clinic. Receptionist by title, emotional sponge by function. Patients complained. Doctors rushed, phones rang endlessly. I kept smiling, because if I stopped, I was afraid everything would fall apart. At night, after homework and baths and stories, always one more story, I would sit on the edge of my bed and stare at the ceiling. Sometimes I wondered if Stevie ever lay awake thinking about us. If he ever missed the way Lana would crawl into bed between us during thunderstorms. If he remembered Amari's first baseball game, the way our son searched the stands for his father's face. Or if he had simply erased us. But the truth is, those questions didn't change anything. Bills still needed paying, shoes still needed replacing, hearts still needed protecting. The real cost of raising my children alone wasn't just financial. It was the constant negotiation between honesty and protection. When Amari's asked why his father didn't come to his school play, I said, "He's busy." When Lana cried on Father's Day because everyone else made cards, I told her, "Some families just look different." I became the shield, the interpreter. The one who absorbed the blow so it wouldn't reach them, and people admired me for it. "You make it look so easy," a neighbor once said as we watched the kids ride bikes on the sidewalk. I laughed. Easy, that word stayed with me. Because behind closed doors, nothing was easy. Behind closed doors, I counted coins in a jar to buy milk. Behind closed doors, I lay awake calculating how long I could keep pretending before something cracked. What no one tells you about being the strong one is this: there is no one strong for you, and I didn't realize how thin I had become, not physically but emotionally, until the first real crack appeared. It started small: a missed payment, a call from the bank, a look on Amari's face that I couldn't quite read. That was when I began to understand that smiling in public was not the same as holding everything together, and that the real cost of survival would soon ask more of me than I was prepared to give. The first crack did not sound like breaking glass. It sounded like a polite voice on the other end of the phone. "Mrs. Harper, this is Martin from Valley Bank. We need to discuss your account." I was standing at the clinic reception desk when he called. The waiting room was full. A baby was crying somewhere near the back. The printer jammed again. I lowered my voice. "Is there a problem?" "There was always a problem. You've missed 2 payments on your car loan. If we don't receive at least one by Friday, we'll have to begin repossession procedures." Repossession? Such a clean word for something so humiliating. I thanked him, actually thanked him, as if he had done me a favor by warning me. Then I hung up and returned to the waiting room with the same steady smile I wore every day. "Thank you for your patience," I said to a man tapping his foot impatiently. "The doctor will see you shortly." Inside, my stomach had turned cold. The car wasn't just a car, it was school drop-offs, it was grocery runs. It was Amari's baseball practice on Thursdays and Lana's dance class on Saturdays. It was how we stayed connected to the world. Losing it would mean losing more than transportation. It would mean losing control. That night, after the kids were asleep, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The screen cast a pale blue light across unpaid bills and a half-empty mug of tea gone cold. I stared at my checking account balance. $147, $32. Rent was due in 10 days. I rubbed my temples and whispered to myself, "Okay, Claire, think I could ask Stevie." The thought came quietly. I hadn't asked him for anything since he left, not beyond what the court had already ordered. I had convinced myself that dignity meant independence, that needing him would somehow confirm every insecurity he had planted before walking out the door. "You've always been too emotional," he used to say when we argued. "You make everything harder than it needs to be." So when he left, I made a promise to myself I would not be needy, I would not beg, I would manage. But managing was starting to look a lot like drowning with good posture. The next afternoon, Amari's came home unusually quiet. He dropped his backpack by the door instead of hanging it on the hook like I'd taught him. "Everything okay?" I asked, slicing carrots for dinner. He shrugged. Yeah, but his shoulders were tight. At dinner, Lana chattered about a butterfly she had drawn in art class. Amari's barely touched his food. Later that night, I found a folded paper in his backpack while checking his homework. It was a permission slip for a class field trip. Cost $35, due by Friday. There was a small note written in his careful handwriting at the bottom. "It's okay if I don't go." I sat down on the edge of his bed, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. He was pretending to be asleep. "Amari's," I whispered. His eyes opened slowly. "You want to go on this trip?" He hesitated, then nodded. "It's to the Science Museum," he said quietly. "They have that space exhibit." I forced my voice to stay steady. "Why didn't you give this to me sooner?" He stared at the ceiling. "I heard you on the phone." My chest tightened. "You were talking about money," he continued. "I don't want to make it worse. 9 years old and already calculating my stress." I reached out and brushed his hair back from his forehead. "Listen to me," I said softly. "It is not your job to worry about money, that's mine." He swallowed. "I can skip it," he insisted. "It's not a big deal." But it was. Because childhood is made of little things that seem small at the time. Field trips, ice cream after practice, new sneakers that don't pinch. And I could see in that moment that he was learning to shrink his wants to fit our reality. That hurt more than any unpaid bill. "You're going," I said firmly. "I'll take care of it." He searched my face as if trying to measure whether I meant it. Then he nodded once. After he fell asleep, I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faucet so the water would drown out any sound. Then I leaned against the sink and let myself cry. Not loud, just enough to release the pressure building inside my ribs, because the real cost of raising children alone isn't just working harder. It's carrying the silent weight of their sacrifices, The next day I called Stevie. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. He answered on the third ring. "Claire." His voice was the same, smooth, detached. "Hi," I said, my throat dry. "I need to talk to you about the kids." A pause. "Is something wrong?" I almost laughed. Everything was wrong. "No," I said carefully. "Amari's has a field trip and I'm behind on the car payment. I was hoping you could." "I already send what I'm required to send." The interruption was swift. "I know," I said quickly, "but things are tight right now, just this once." "Claire," he exhaled. "I have a new life here, expenses you don't know about. New life." As if we had been the old one. "They're your children," I said, my voice quieter now, "and I support them." "Barely." Silence stretched between us. Then he said, "You wanted to keep the house. You wanted primary custody. These were your choices." The words felt like a slap, choices, as if I had chosen to be abandoned. "I didn't choose this," I whispered. "Well," he replied coolly, "this is the arrangement." And just like that, the conversation ended. I stood in the clinic supply closet long after the call disconnected, staring at shelves of gauze and disinfectant. I realized something then. Stevie wasn't the crack, he was the absence. The real crack was the quiet erosion of my strength. The way I had convinced myself that asking for help was weakness. That night I drove to my mother's house. I hadn't planned to, but the steering wheel seemed to guide me there. She opened the door before I even knocked, as if she had sensed me. "Claire." And that was all it took. I didn't fall apart dramatically. I didn't collapse into her arms. I just stepped inside and said, "I'm tired." She made tea, chamomile. The smell reminded me of childhood fevers and gentle hands on my forehead. We sat at her small kitchen table. "I can help with the kids," she said quietly, "or with groceries." I stared into my cup. "I don't want to be a burden." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're my daughter, not a burden." Something inside me shifted. Because I had been so focused on proving I could do it alone that I forgot something simple. Strength does not mean isolation. The next week, my mother began picking up the kids from school twice a week. She brought casseroles. She slipped grocery store gift cards into my purse when I wasn't looking. And slowly, the immediate pressure eased. Amari's went on his field trip. He came home glowing, talking about rockets and planets and how he wanted to be an engineer someday. Lana started sleeping through the night again. I kept smiling in public, but something was changing behind closed doors. Not everything was fixed. The car payment was still late, Stevie was still distant, and I was still exhausted. But I was no longer pretending that I was invincible. And sometimes that is the first step toward survival. Still, I didn't know then that the real turning point wasn't financial. It wasn't the bank, it wasn't even Stevie, it was coming from somewhere much closer. From inside my own home. The first time I sensed something shifting inside my own home, it wasn't loud, it was quiet. Too quiet. It happened on a Thursday evening, the kind that usually felt predictable. Amari's had baseball practice. Lana was at the kitchen table drawing flowers that looked more like fireworks. My mother had just left after dropping off a casserole wrapped in foil. I remember the smell of tomato sauce lingering in the air. I remember feeling, for the first time in months, a flicker of steadiness. Then the phone rang. It was Amari's coach. "Mrs. Harper, I just wanted to check in. Amari's didn't come to practice today." My hand tightened around the receiver. "He left the house at 4, I said slowly. "Practice starts at 4:30. There was a pause on the other end. "Well, he wasn't here." The space between those words felt endless. "I'll call you back," I managed. When I hung up, the house felt different. The ticking clock in the hallway sounded louder. Lana looked up at me, sensing the change in the air. "Where's Amari's?" she asked. "He'll be home soon," I said automatically, but my chest was already tightening. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. I grabbed my keys and told Lana to put on her shoes. My mother lived 10 minutes away. She could stay with her while I looked. The drive felt longer than usual. Every red light felt personal. When I dropped Lana off, I didn't explain much. I just said, "I need to find your brother." My mother didn't ask questions. She just nodded and squeezed my shoulder. I drove toward the baseball field first. Empty. The sky was turning orange, the light fading into something uneasy. I checked the park across the street. Nothing. My mind began filling in worst-case scenarios without my permission. Then I remembered something Amari's had mentioned weeks ago. A boy named Marcus. Older, 7th grade. "He knows cool stuff," Amari's had said once, his eyes bright in a way I didn't fully understand at the time. Marcus lived 3 blocks from us. I drove there. The house was small, paint peeling near the porch. 2 bikes lay on the lawn, and there he was, sitting on the curb with Marcus and 2 other boys I didn't recognize. My relief came first, sharp and overwhelming. Then something else. Amari's wasn't laughing. He was watching, trying to fit in. I parked and stepped out of the car. Amari's. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. He froze. Marcus looked at me with mild annoyance. Oh, Amari's muttered, standing quickly. Mom, practice, I said calmly. He stared at his sneakers. I didn't feel like going. The other boys shifted uncomfortably. I didn't argue there. I just said, get in the car. The ride home was silent, not angry silence, something heavier. Inside the house, I sat at the kitchen table and waited for him to join me. He hovered in the doorway first, then slowly took the chair across from mine. You scared me, I said quietly. He shrugged. I'm fine. That's not the point. He didn't look at me. I just didn't want to go. Why? His jaw tightened. Because Dad used to take me. The words landed softly but cut deep. He used to sit in the stands, Amari's continued. Other dads still do. I swallowed. And it feels stupid, he said, his voice cracking just slightly, like I'm pretending everything's normal. There it was, the truth I had been shielding him from, or maybe shielding myself from. I didn't know you felt that way, I whispered. You're always tired, he replied quickly. I don't want to make it worse. Again, that wordless calculation, that quiet shrinking. I reached across the table. You don't have to protect me, I said. His eyes met mine then, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Resentment. Not at me, but at the situation, at the absence, and perhaps just a little at the version of strength I had been performing. I don't need you to be strong all the time, he said softly. It was such a simple sentence, but it cracked something open inside me. Because I realized that in trying to be unbreakable, I had made myself unreachable. That night after he went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt still. I replayed the past year in my mind, the forced cheerfulness, the careful answers. The way I avoided saying Stevie's name too often. I thought I was protecting them from pain, but pain doesn't disappear just because you refuse to speak it. It finds other doors. The next morning I did something different. At breakfast I didn't rush, I didn't perform. I sat down with them. I need to talk to you both, I said. Lana's spoon paused midair. Amari's looked wary. I've been trying very hard to make everything seem okay, I began, and most days it is okay, but sometimes it's also hard. They listened. It's hard for me, I continued, and I know it's hard for you too. Silence, then Lana spoke first. I miss Daddy. Her voice was small. Amari's looked down. I miss who he used to be, he said quietly. There are moments as a mother when you want to correct your child, to soften their words, to defend someone, but I didn't. Because this wasn't about defending Stevie, it was about acknowledging reality. I miss that too, I admitted, and something shifted in the room. It wasn't dramatic. No tears, no shouting, just honesty. For the first time since Stevie left, we were speaking the same language. That week, I made a decision. I picked up an extra evening shift at the clinic, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I needed stability. I arranged for my mother to stay with the kids those nights. It meant less sleep, more fatigue, but it also meant catching up on the car payment. It meant Amari's wouldn't have to skip practice. It meant Lana could keep her dance class. But the real shift wasn't financial. It was emotional. I stopped pretending that we were untouched. I stopped smiling through every crack, and in doing so I noticed something unexpected. The kids began talking more. Amari's told me when he was angry. Lana admitted when she felt left out at school. And I allowed myself to say, I'm tired, without feeling ashamed. Still, life didn't magically become easier. Stevie called sporadically, promises of visits that rarely happened. The bank sent reminders. Exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, but the distance between me and my children began to close. Until one evening when Amari stood in the doorway of my bedroom and asked something that would change everything. Mom, if Dad doesn't want to come back, does that mean we weren't enough? The question was soft. But it carried the weight of every silent fear I had tried to absorb for them. And I realized then, the real cost behind closed doors wasn't just financial strain or sleepless nights. It was the story my children were beginning to tell themselves about their worth. And that was something I could not afford to ignore. When Amari's asked me if they weren't enough, I felt something inside me go very still. Not shattered, not explosive, just still. because I understood in that quiet second that this was the real battle, not the bills. Not the car, not even Stevie. It was the invisible narrative forming in my children's minds. I sat up in bed and motioned for Amari's to come closer. He hesitated, then walked in slowly, sitting at the edge of my mattress the way he used to when he was little and couldn't sleep. "Look at me," I said gently. He did. "You were always enough. Lana was always enough. This was never about that." He swallowed. Then why did he leave? There it was. The question I had rehearsed answers to in the shower, in the car, in the quiet moments between phone calls at work, but none of the rehearsed answers felt honest enough. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "grown-ups make choices because they're confused about themselves, not because of the people around them." He studied my face, searching for cracks. "Did you do something wrong?" he asked, and that question, that one hurt more than all the others. Because I had asked it of myself for months, I reached for his hand. "No," I said, steady this time. "We both made mistakes in our marriage, but leaving wasn't your fault, and it was Lana's, and it wasn't because we weren't enough." He nodded slowly. Then he leaned into me, awkwardly at first, then fully. He hadn't done that in a long time, and I held him, not as the strong one, not as the unbreakable one, just as his mother. After he went to bed, I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I sat quietly and realized something that felt uncomfortable but true. I had spent so much time proving we were okay that I hadn't allowed space for the damage. And damage left unspoken becomes identity. The next week, I requested a meeting with the school counselor. Not because something catastrophic had happened, but because I refused to let quiet questions grow roots. Sitting in that small office with its motivational posters and faint smell of dry erase marker, I felt strangely exposed. "I think my son is carrying more than he should," I told the counselor. She nodded gently. "That's common in children after divorce." The word divorce sounded clinical, clean. Nothing about our experience had been clean. "Would he be open to talking?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I have to try." When I told Amari's about the idea that evening, he stiffened. "I'm not crazy," he said quickly. "I know," I replied softly. "Talking doesn't mean something's wrong with you, it just means you don't have to carry everything alone." He stared at the floor for a long moment. "Will you talk to someone too?" he asked. That caught me off guard. "Why would I?" "Because you're always tired," he interrupted quietly. I exhaled. He wasn't accusing, he was observing. And I realized that children don't just listen to what we say, they read what we don't. "Maybe I should," I admitted. And that was the beginning of something I hadn't planned for. I found a low-cost therapist through the clinic's employee assistance program. Her office was modest, tucked above a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon rolls. The first session, I almost turned around halfway up the stairs. I didn't feel broken enough to justify therapy, but when I sat down across from her and she asked, "How are you really doing?" my throat tightened in a way I couldn't control. For months, I had been the listener, the organizer, the stabilizer. No one had asked me that question without expecting a polite answer. "I'm surviving," I said. "And what does that cost you?" she asked gently. I didn't answer right away because I didn't have the language yet. But as weeks passed, I began to find it. The cost was sleep. The cost was softness. The cost was the quiet belief that if I stopped pushing, everything would collapse. Meanwhile, Stevie became more inconsistent, missed calls, canceled visits, excuses wrapped in politeness. "I've just been busy," he'd say. Busy, as if parenting were optional. One Saturday, he promised to take the kids for the weekend. They packed small overnight bags. Lana insisted on bringing her stuffed rabbit. Amari's pretended not to be excited. He never showed up, no call, no message, nothing. I watched from the living room window as the sun lowered and their hope slowly dimmed. Lana sat on the couch, rabbit clutched tightly. "Maybe he's stuck in traffic," she whispered. Amari's didn't say anything. He just went to his room and closed the door. I called Stevie 3 times. Voicemail. By 9 p.m., I stopped trying. I made pancakes for dinner. We ate them in our pajamas. I kept my voice light. "His loss," I said gently. "More pancakes for us." Lana smiled weakly. Amari's didn't. Later that night, I heard him crying, not loudly. Just enough. I stood outside his door for a moment before knocking. "Can I come in?" He didn't answer. I went in anyway. He was lying on his side, facing the wall. "I hate him," he said quietly. I sat beside him. "It's okay to feel angry," I replied. "I hate that I still want him to come." There it was again, the confusion, the loyalty mixed with hurt. I know, I whispered, and I did, because part of me still wanted the version of Stevie who used to hold my hand during thunderstorms, even after everything. Love doesn't disappear neatly, it erodes. That weekend changed something in me, not into bitterness, but into clarity. I realized that waiting for Stevie to become consistent was like waiting for rain in a drought. I couldn't build our emotional stability on his unpredictability. So I stopped adjusting our plans around him. If he called, fine. If he didn't, we moved forward anyway. We created our own traditions. Friday movie nights, Sunday morning walks, tiny rituals that belonged only to us. And slowly the house began to feel less like a place missing someone, and more like a place becoming something new. Still, the financial strain remained. The extra shifts wore me down. One evening, after a 14-hour day, I fell asleep at the kitchen table while helping Lana with spelling. When I woke up, she had covered me with a blanket. "I didn't want you to be cold," she said softly. 6 years old, already caretaking. That was the moment I understood something clearly. My children were watching how I survived, not just what I said, but how I carried myself through disappointment, through exhaustion, through absence. And if I wasn't careful, they would learn that love meant overextending until you disappeared. That night, after they were asleep, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. There were faint lines at the corners of my eyes that hadn't been there before. I wasn't old, but I was worn, and I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. What kind of life am I teaching them to accept? What kind of life am I teaching them to accept? The question followed me for days. It showed up while I folded laundry, while I stood in line at the pharmacy, while I signed yet another school form with a pen that was running out of ink. I had spent so long teaching my children resilience that I hadn't noticed what else I was modeling. Overwork, self-erasure, silence. The following Monday, I was called into my supervisor's office at the clinic. Her name was Marlene. She was efficient, kind in a structured way, the type of woman who believed in schedules and measurable outcomes. "Claire," she said, folding her hands neatly on her desk, "you've been picking up a lot of extra shifts." "I know," I replied carefully, "and you're good at your job, but you've seemed distracted lately." I felt heat rise in my face. "I'm fine," I said automatically. There it was again, fine. She tilted her head slightly. "You fell asleep at the front desk last Thursday." I swallowed. "I'm sorry." She softened then. "This isn't about reprimanding you, it's about sustainability." That word lingered, sustainability. "You can't keep operating at this pace," she continued. "Burnout is real, and when you burn out, everyone feels it." I nodded, though part of me resisted. If I slowed down, who would pick up the difference? Marlene leaned back in her chair. "Have you considered applying for the administrative coordinator position?" I blinked. "That requires certification." "We can sponsor you for the course," she said. "It's evening classes for 4 months, higher pay, more stable hours." The room felt suddenly very quiet. Evening classes, 4 months, higher pay, but also more juggling, more strain in the short term. "I don't know if I can manage that," I admitted. "Claire," she said gently, "managing isn't the same as growing." I left her office unsettled. Growth felt like a luxury, managing felt like survival. That night after dinner, I brought it up to the kids. "There might be a chance for me to take some classes," I said, trying to sound casual. Amari's looked up immediately. "Like school, sort of. Will it help with money?" he asked. "Yes," I answered honestly. "Eventually." Lana tilted her head. "Will you be home less?" The question held no accusation, just concern. "For a little while," I admitted. "Grandma would help more." Amari's was quiet for a moment. "You should do it," he said finally. I looked at him, surprised. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because you always tell us to work hard for stuff that matters. Children listen more than we think." But I hesitated, not because I doubted my ability, because I doubted my right, the right to want more than survival. That weekend, Stevie called unexpectedly. "I've been thinking," he began. That sentence always made me brace myself. "I might move closer," he said. "There's an opportunity here that didn't work out." Opportunity, his life seemed built on them, and, I asked carefully, "And I think it would be better for the kids if I was nearby." The words sounded responsible, but something in his tone felt different, less about the kids, more about convenience. "When?" I asked. "Couple of months maybe." I didn't celebrate, I didn't argue, I simply said they need consistency, not possibilities. He sighed. "You always make things complicated." There it was again, the subtle shift of blame. "I'm not making it complicated," I replied calmly. "I'm asking for reliability." Silence stretched between us, then he said, "We'll talk soon." After the call ended, I sat in the quiet living room and felt something unexpected. Not hope. Not fear, indifference, and that surprised me more than anything, because indifference meant something inside me had healed enough to stop waiting. The following week, I enrolled in the certification course. The first night of class, I almost turned around in the parking lot. The building was brightly lit. Students moved confidently through the hallways. I felt older than I was, out of place, but I walked in anyway. The classroom smelled faintly of dry markers and industrial cleaner. I took a seat near the back. For 2 hours, I listened. I took notes. I asked one small question. And when I walked out into the cool evening air, something inside me felt alive. Not dramatic, not transformative, just awake. The adjustment at home wasn't seamless. There were evenings when Lana cried because I missed bedtime stories. There were nights Amari's reheated leftovers for both of them because my class ran late. I felt guilt rise like a reflex, but I also saw something new. They were capable, they were adapting, and they were proud. One evening, as I reviewed study material at the kitchen table, Amari sat across from me doing math homework. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "A little," I admitted. "Good," he said thoughtfully. "That means it matters." I smiled. He had learned that somewhere, maybe from me. Maybe from watching. Then came the call from the bank again. But this time, it wasn't about repossession. It was about catching up. "You're back in good standing," the representative said. I closed my eyes briefly in relief. One crisis stabilized, but life has a way of layering challenges. 2 weeks later, Stevie showed up unannounced. Saturday morning, the kids were still in pajamas. He stood at the door looking slightly thinner, slightly older, carrying the scent of unfamiliar cologne. Lana ran to him immediately. Amari's hesitated. Stevie hugged them both. "I'm in town," he said casually. "Thought I'd take you to breakfast." I forced a polite smile. "We had plans," I replied evenly. He looked surprised. "Since when?" "Since we stopped waiting." The words slipped out before I could soften them. He studied me differently then, not with irritation, with curiosity. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," I answered simply. He took the kids to breakfast anyway. When they returned, Lana was cheerful. Amari's was quiet. Later that evening, Amari's knocked on my bedroom door. "Dad says maybe we could live with him if he moves back," he said cautiously. My breath caught. "And how do you feel about that?" I asked. He stared at his hands. "I don't want to leave you." The simplicity of it broke my heart. "You wouldn't have to choose," I said gently, but I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Stevie wasn't just reappearing, he was repositioning, and I sensed that the next phase wouldn't be about survival alone. It would be about boundaries, about ownership, about the story of our family moving forward. And for the first time since he left, I felt ready for that conversation. Stevie didn't move back quietly, he moved back strategically. Within a month, he had rented an apartment 15 minutes away, close enough to feel present, far enough to avoid daily responsibility. He began calling more often, dropping by with short notice, offering spontaneous outings. To an outsider, it might have looked admirable, a father trying, but I had learned the difference between effort and consistency. The first real test came on a Wednesday evening. I had just returned from class, my bag heavy with textbooks, my mind still full of terminology and deadlines. The house smelled like the pasta my mother had made earlier. Amari's was finishing homework. Lana was building something elaborate out of mismatched blocks. The doorbell rang. Stevie stood there with a confident half-smile. "I thought I'd take the kids for ice cream," he said, midweek treat. I glanced at the clock. 7:45 p.m. "They have school tomorrow," I replied evenly. "It's just ice cream." Amari's had already appeared behind me. Lana peeked around his arm. "Can we go?" Lana asked, hopeful. I looked at their faces. I looked at Stevie's expectant expression. And I felt that old pressure rising, the pressure to accommodate, to smooth things over, to avoid conflict in front of the kids. But I had spent months learning something new. Boundaries are not cruelty. "They can go," I said calmly, "for 30 minutes. Stevie raised an eyebrow. "You don't trust me with my own kids?" "This isn't about trust," I answered. "It's about routine." His jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. 30 minutes, he agreed. They left laughing. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. My mother, who had been folding laundry in the hallway, stepped into the living room. "You handled that well," she said. "I'm not trying to win," I replied. "I'm trying to stabilize." She studied me carefully. "You're not afraid of him anymore." I hadn't realized that until she said it. I wasn't afraid he would leave again. I wasn't afraid of being alone, and I certainly wasn't afraid of his disappointment. When the kids returned, Lana was sticky with chocolate and joy. Amari's was quieter. That night after Lana fell asleep, Amari's lingered in the kitchen. Dad says he might try for shared custody, he said cautiously. There it was, the strategy. I kept my voice steady. Did he explain what that means? Just that we'd stay with him more. And how does that feel? He shrugged. Different. Different was a careful word. I nodded slowly. You don't have to decide anything right now, that's between adults. But inside, my heart was racing. Shared custody would mean court, lawyers, money I didn't have. The next day, Stevie called. I think it's time we reconsider the arrangement, he said plainly. Based on what? I asked. Based on the fact that I'm here now and I deserve equal time. Deserve. The word felt loaded. Consistency isn't measured in geography, I replied calmly. It's measured in behavior, he sighed. Claire, you've always been dramatic. And there it was again, the old script. I almost laughed. I'm not being dramatic, I said. I'm being realistic. He paused, perhaps surprised by my tone. I'll file paperwork, he said finally. When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I made tea. Then I called a legal aid office. Sitting in the small consultation room days later, listening to the attorney explain the process, I felt a strange mixture of fear and clarity. He can request it, she said. But courts prioritize stability. Documentation matters. Documentation. For months, I had been documenting everything out of habit: missed visits, canceled plans, late payments, not out of vengeance, out of record. It turned out that survival had been building evidence all along. The hearing date was set for early spring. I didn't tell the kids details. I simply told them there will be a meeting where adults decide what's best. Lana asked, "Are we in trouble?" "No," I said firmly. "This isn't about trouble, it's about structure." But children sense tension even when it's quiet. Amari's became more withdrawn in the weeks leading up to it. Lana asked more questions at bedtime. One night she crawled into my bed again, rabbit tucked under her chin. "Are you sad?" she asked softly. I thought about lying, but I didn't. "I'm nervous," I admitted. "But not sad. Why not?" "Because no matter what happens, I'm still your mom." She seemed satisfied with that. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, not flashy, not defensive, just steady. In the courthouse hallway, Stevie stood a few feet away, checking his phone. For a moment, we were just two people who used to share a life. He looked at me and said quietly, "It doesn't have to be hostile." "It isn't," I replied. "It's structured." Inside the courtroom, everything felt smaller than I expected. The judge listened, asked questions. Reviewed records. Stevie spoke about involvement, about fresh starts, about fairness. I spoke about routines, about school stability, about emotional continuity. I didn't attack him. I didn't list grievances. I described reality. When it was over, the judge ruled to maintain primary custody with gradual visitation increases, conditioned on consistency over time. Structure, not punishment. Outside, Stevie looked frustrated. "You've turned them against me," he muttered. I met his gaze evenly. "No, I've taught them to expect reliability." And that was the truth. The weeks after the hearing were quieter. Stevie followed the schedule more carefully now, perhaps pride, perhaps fear of losing ground, but something subtle had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was responding. At home, life began settling into a new rhythm. My certification course neared completion. The kids seemed lighter, and I realized something profound. The real cost I had paid wasn't just financial. It was the belief that I had to carry everything alone. But now I had boundaries, I had support, I had growth. And most importantly, I had reclaimed my voice. Still, healing isn't a straight line. Just when I thought we had stabilized, something unexpected forced us into the public eye in a way I never anticipated. And this time, smiling wouldn't be enough. The unexpected exposure didn't come from court. It came from something much smaller, a school fundraiser. It was the annual spring benefit dinner, parents, teachers, silent auction tables lined with gift baskets and handmade crafts. I had volunteered to help coordinate registration, mostly because it felt easier to stay busy than to sit at a round table making polite conversation. The gymnasium smelled faintly of floor polish and catered pasta. Folding chairs scraped against the polished wood. Laughter bounced off the walls in short, echoing bursts. I wore a navy dress I hadn't taken out of my closet in years. It fit differently now, looser at the waist, tighter at the shoulders. Stronger, I thought quietly. Stevie arrived 20 minutes late. He walked in with the same easy confidence he used to carry into dinner parties when we were married. He greeted people warmly, shook hands, smiled widely. To anyone watching, we looked like a modern, cooperative divorced couple. He approached the registration table where I stood. "You look good," he said casually. "Thank you," I replied, handing him his name tag. Amaris and Lana were across the gym with friends. Amari's posture had changed recently, less slouched, more deliberate. Lana spun in her little floral dress, oblivious to adult complexities. Halfway through the evening, during a break in the program, I stepped outside for air. The night was cool. Crickets hummed softly near the parking lot lights. I didn't expect Stevie to follow me. "You've been telling people I abandoned you," he said abruptly. I turned slowly. "I haven't told anyone anything. That's not what I'm hearing." A flicker of irritation rose in me. "I don't control what people observe," I replied calmly. He exhaled sharply. "You've always cared about appearances." That almost made me laugh. "I smiled because I had to," I said quietly, "not because I cared what they thought." He studied me then more carefully. "You've changed," he repeated. "Yes," I answered again. "And you're not angry anymore," he added, almost confused. I thought about that. "I was never angry," I said slowly. "I was hurt. There's a difference." He didn't respond right away. Inside the gym, someone tapped a microphone. The feedback squealed briefly. Then I heard something that made my chest tighten. Amari's name. He had been nominated for a student leadership award. I walked back inside quickly. He stood near the stage, startled as his teacher described his quiet responsibility and steady presence. "He often helps classmates without being asked," she continued. "He's learned resilience beyond his years." Resilience beyond his years. The words felt like both praise and confession. When he walked onto the stage, the applause was warm and genuine. I saw Stevie's expression from across the room, pride, but also something else, distance. After the ceremony, several parents approached me. "You've done such an incredible job," one mother said sincerely. "I don't know how you manage it all," another added. I smiled politely. There it was again, the public version of strength. But something was different this time because I didn't feel like I was pretending. I had managed, not perfectly, not gracefully every day, but honestly. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Stevie called. "I've been thinking," he began, that phrase again. "I want to increase my visitation," he said. "Not legally, just more organically." I waited. "I missed a lot," he admitted quietly. There was no defensiveness in his tone this time. "Just recognition, that's true," I replied evenly, "and I can't undo that." "No," I said, silence. "I don't want to compete with you," he continued. "I just want to show up." For a moment I felt something unexpected, compassion. Because for all his failures, Stevie wasn't a villain from a storybook. He was a flawed man who made selfish choices, and now he was confronting the consequences of them. "Showing up isn't about grand gestures," I said calmly. "It's about small, repeated presence." He nodded, though I couldn't see him. "I'll try," he said. After the call ended, I sat in the quiet living room. The house felt different than it had a year ago, not lighter because problems disappeared, lighter because I wasn't carrying them alone in silence anymore. The next few months were not perfect. Stevie missed one scheduled visit but called to apologize, something he had never done before. Amaris began spending occasional Saturdays with him willingly, not out of obligation. Lana remained cautiously hopeful. Meanwhile, I completed my certification. The night I received the official confirmation email, I stood in the kitchen staring at the screen for a long time. Administrative coordinator, higher salary, regular hours, health benefits, stability. I didn't cry, I didn't jump, I simply exhaled. Because this wasn't dramatic triumph, it was earned progress. When I told the kids, Lana clapped. Amaris smiled in that restrained way he had when he was proud but trying not to show it too much. "I told you it mattered," he said, and in that moment I realized something quietly profound. The real cost behind closed doors had shaped us, but it hadn't broken us. It had forced conversations we might have avoided. It had built muscles we didn't know we had. Still, one final test remained. The following week at another school event, a parent approached me. "I heard Stevie is trying to get more custody," she said casually. The word spread quickly in small communities. Rumors, interpretations, half-truths. In the past, that would have rattled me. I would have worried about narrative, about perception. But this time I simply said, "We're working through what's best for the kids." And that was enough, because the truth no longer felt fragile. It felt grounded. At home that evening, Amaris sat beside me on the couch. "Are we okay?" he asked quietly. I looked around our living room, the worn sofa, the stack of library books on the coffee table, Lana asleep under a blanket. "Yes," I said honestly, "we are, not because life was perfect, but because we had learned how to face imperfection together." And that more than anything felt like healing.